Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're gonna have a look at Diamine Pumpkin. Let's look at the swatch first. It's a somewhat red-leaning orange, but I would still call this an orange ink. Here is what it looks like in comparison with Diamine Sunshine Yellow, which is an orange-leaning yellow. Here it is next to the Robert Oster NG Special, which I would call true orange, and then a somewhat orange-leaning red Wild Strawberry, and a red-leaning brown Diamine Fireside Snug. This is what it looks like on Rhodia paper. The lettering on top was done with a brush, and we can see that on a very wet application it looks almost red. Almost no shading on extra fine nib, but a nice consistent readable line. Then the tone changes somewhat for fine, medium broad and 1.1, but the ink doesn't like to shade that much. Only on 1.1 we can see a little bit of shading, otherwise there is almost no shading. Ease of cleaning I put 3 out of 5. This ink has a pink component to it, and pink inks can stain converters. It's fairly easy to flush, but it does stain a tiny bit. Dry time, there was a minimal amount of smudging after 20 seconds, so I would call this a 20-second dry time. When it comes to water resistance, most of the orange went away, and there is this pink undertone which stayed, and I guess this could be somewhat readable, but for all practical applications this is not a water resistant ink. On the back side we see some bleed through at the swatch here. This is a stain from another ink, and there is a little bit of bleed through on the brush application, but other than that this is a well-behaved ink. Copy paper. Now we see even those little bits of shading disappear completely, and with the extra fine nib the ink looked almost brown. The tone is quite consistent and the ink doesn't show any feathering. On the back side we see bleed through on the swatch. Other than that, just a couple of dots, so this is perfectly usable on copy paper. Hobonichi notebook paper. Again, sorry for the smudge with a different ink here. We see a tiny bit of shading for extra fine and 1.1, maybe a little bit more intense red in the wet areas of the swatch. Overall, I would say there is a tiny bit more shading than on Rhodia. And on the back side we see a bleed through on the swatch, but otherwise looks really great. And since this is not a very dark ink, we also have very minimal see-through. Let's move on to Midori paper. The ink looks a little bit more muted on this cream paper, and again there is very minimal amount of shading apart from 1.1 stub. On the back side we see no bleed through, no show through, as we would generally expect from Midori paper. Let's compare the tone shift between the two papers. The ink is a little bit darker on the cream Midori paper, but there is no dramatic tone shift, and I prefer this ink on the white paper because it stands out a little bit more. Generally, I quite like this ink. It's a fun, bright orange that's quite unique. It has no flow issues. The only problem that I had with this ink was that tiny bit of staining. Chromatography. This is where this ink truly shines. We can see a lot of yellow and a lot of pink, and it looks nothing like the ink itself. And its hidden talent is how awesome it looks when you try to use it for art. So this was painted by Diamine Pumpkin. All of the upper part except for the hills down here. We can see how incredible range of color of this ink is when you dilute it with water a little bit. We can easily get all the yellows, all the pinks, plus the red-orange like here in this sun. The only issue is that you have to really think about what kind of scene would fit this yellow and pink combination. But if you want to experiment with fountain pen ink art, I would say this is perfect. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!